The lights of the studio burned bright, casting sharp shadows across the table. Elon Musk leaned forward, his smirk cutting sharper than the words that followed. Congresswoman Crockett will regret this. I'll sue. I'll take her to court and show her what real power looks like. His voice echoed with the kind of arrogance only the world's richest man could summon. The anchors froze mid-breath. The audience drew back, the silence louder than thunder. Then across from him, Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She turned ever so slightly, and her lawyer, a steady figure with eyes full of fire hidden behind composure, met Musk's stare. The pause stretched like a wire about to snap, and then in one deliberate breath came the line that changed everything. If you want to test power, the lawyer said, voice calm, yet unshakable, we'll meet you in a court where truth, not money, decides. Gasps rippled through the room. For a moment, the billionaire who boasted about rockets and empires looked smaller, diminished. Musk's smirk flickered. The kind of flicker that betrays something deeper, a crack in confidence. Narrator, this wasn't just a clash between a mogul and a lawmaker. It was something far greater, a symbol of wealth colliding with justice, of privilege daring to bully truth. And in that instant, the battle lines were drawn. One man with unthinkable riches and one woman, backed not by fortune, but by dignity, community, and the law itself. The cameras caught every second. Hashtags began to form, tweets firing into the void. Hashtag Musk vs. Crockett, hashtag power on trial. Millions didn't yet know what was about to unfold, but they could feel it, that this wasn't just talk. It was the opening salvo of a cultural earthquake. And as Musk shifted uneasily in his seat, Crockett's calm was louder than his threats. This wasn't fear. This was preparation. Narrator, he thought money could bend the rules, silence critics, and rewrite the story. But what came next would leave even Elon Musk begging for mercy. The weight of Elon Musk's words didn't just hang in the studio air. It thundered across the country. Here was the richest man on earth, threatening to unleash his fortune like a weapon to drown a critic in legal firepower. For Musk, lawsuits weren't about justice. They were tools of intimidation, sharpened to cut down those who dared to speak against him. He had wielded them before, against whistleblowers, against journalists, against anyone bold enough to pull back the curtain. To him, the courtroom wasn't a place for truth. It was a battlefield where money decided who walked away standing. But this time the target wasn't some lone reporter or faceless critic. This time it was Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a woman who had built her life in real courtrooms, standing shoulder to shoulder with the marginalized, the overlooked, the people Musk's empire rarely even saw. Her armor wasn't money, but principle. Her shield wasn't privilege, but service. Narrator, and that was the difference. Musk had spent a lifetime learning how to bend rules around him. Crockett had spent hers making sure rules were followed for everyone. The moment the threat left Musk's lips, America lit up. Hashtags surged through timelines. Hashtag sue or be shut down. Hashtag truth vs. power. Clips of the exchange ricocheted across platforms, with millions replaying that one devastating line from Crockett's lawyer. Commentators rushed in. Was this intimidation? Could Musk's billions silence a sitting congresswoman? Or had he just triggered a showdown that might define more than his ego? In barber shops, classrooms, coffee shops, the conversation ignited. For immigrants who had faced intimidation from bosses, landlords, or politicians, the spectacle felt personal. For working-class Americans who had seen billionaires by influence, Musk's sneer looked all too familiar. Crockett wasn't just speaking for herself anymore. She was carrying the frustration of millions who knew what it felt like to be dismissed by wealth. The stakes stretched beyond two people. At its core, this was about whether democracy itself could withstand the shadow of unchecked money. Could truth survive in a system where the powerful had every tool to crush dissent? Could dignity hold when arrogance strutted with endless cash? Behind it, narrator, this wasn't Musk versus Crockett. This was a test of America's promise. A test of whether one voice, armed with truth, could stand against an empire built on wealth and intimidation. But as the online storm grew, Musk sat certain in his belief that money never loses. He saw the hashtags, the outrage, and he smirked. He thought he had seen it all before. Critics rise, critics fall, and his empire always remained. What he didn't see, what he couldn't predict, was how this time would be different. Cliffhanger. Because Musk had no idea how disastrously this gamble would backfire. Elon Musk didn't begin as a villain in the public imagination. Once he was the dreamer, the boy from South Africa who built companies out of sheer audacity. He was the genius who spoke of Mars when everyone else spoke only of markets. He promised clean cars, revolutionary rockets, and a future unchained from fossil fuels. For years, people saw him as a kind of modern Edison, eccentric, maybe flawed, but brilliant. He was the billionaire who wanted to save humanity. But somewhere along the way, the dreamer became the mogul. And the mogul learned to sneer. The same man who once sold hope, now sold hubris. The one who claimed to champion innovation became obsessed with domination. He amassed not just wealth, but influence, shaping markets with tweets, shaking governments with threats, and as his empire expanded, so did his ego. Narrator, Elon Musk learned that when you control rockets, satellites, and money itself, you begin to believe you control the truth. The contradictions piled up like debris from one of his own failed rocket launches. He preached free speech, yet blocked critics online. He mocked government oversight, yet demanded taxpayer subsidies to fuel his ventures. He told workers to sacrifice for the mission while spending billions on vanity projects and court battles. He claimed to despise the establishment while quietly buying the very platforms that shaped it. The lawsuits became a pattern. Whistleblowers who dared expose safety issues, dragged to court. Former employees who raised alarms about toxic workplaces, threatened into silence. Journalists who reported too critically. Musk labeled them enemies, unleashing online mobs too, harassed them into retreat. Clips of his temper tantrums became internet fodder. Musk lashing out at analysts who dared question his numbers. Musk joking about stock crashes that erased billions. Musk dismissing regulators as fun police when they tried to enforce rules. The more powerful he grew, the more openly he wielded that power like a cudgel. Narrator. For all his rockets and riches, Musk never learned the limits of power. And when he couldn't charm his way through criticism, he crushed it. What made his threat against Jasmine Crockett so revealing wasn't that it was new, it was that it was predictable. Musk had always believed money could bend the world, that intimidation could buy silence. At the courtroom was just another launch pad for his ego. But this time, his target wasn't an engineer or a journalist. It wasn't a faceless employee. With bills to pay and no army of supporters to rally behind them, this time, it was a woman forged in struggle, elected by the people. Backed not by billions, but by voices that refused to be erased. Crockett wasn't some anonymous critic Musk could smear on social media. She wasn't a disposable employee he could outspend. She was the embodiment of a truth far older than his empire, that dignity outlasts money. And that arrogance has a breaking point. Musk may have built rockets, but Crockett had built resilience. He may have launched satellites, but she had launched movements. He may have spoken in sound bites, but she spoke for communities who had lived the reality of being dismissed, mocked, and told to step aside. Narrator. Musk thought his billions made him untouchable. But history has shown wealth without wisdom always meets its reckoning. The stage was set. Man who thought he could buy silence faced a woman who had spent her life giving voice to the silenced. A mogul who had never met limits was about to collide with someone who had lived within them and broken through anyway. Cliffhanger. And Jasmine Crockett wasn't built to bow. Jasmine Crockett's story doesn't begin in the marble halls of Congress or the spotlight of national debates. It begins in Texas, where the heat was relentless, the hours long, and dignity was earned, not handed down. She was the daughter of working-class roots, raised in a world where nothing was guaranteed but the belief that hard work and persistence might one day shift the ground beneath your feet. Her parents didn't have privilege to pass down. What they had was grit, faith, and the stubborn refusal to give up. Narrator: where Musk inherited power, Crockett inherited struggle. And struggle has a way of forging something stronger than wealth: resilience. From the start, Crockett knew the weight of being underestimated. She was the young black girl who people whispered wasn't supposed to make it this far. Yet every time the world tried to close the door, she pushed it open wider. She studied with a ferocity that left no doubt about her determination. Law school wasn't just an ambition, it was survival. It was her way of arming herself with the tools to fight for those who never got their day in court. When Crockett stepped into her first courtroom as an attorney, she wasn't draped in privilege. She was carrying the weight of every client who'd been dismissed, mocked, or written off because of where they came from, or how much money they didn't have. Her cases weren't about boardroom disputes or stock portfolios. They were about families facing eviction, workers silenced by corporations, communities ignored by a system designed to favor the powerful. In those early years, Crockett learned how to stare arrogance in the eye and not blink. Judges tried to wave her off, opposing counsel tried to intimidate her, but she stood firm. She wasn't defending numbers on a balance sheet, she was defending lives. With every win, with every precedent set, her reputation grew, not as someone who played politics, but as someone who played for keeps. That same fire carried her into Congress. She didn't arrive as a polished insider with donors lining up at her door. She arrived as a fighter, unapologetically loud when dignity demanded it, unapologetically sharp when truth was on the line. On the House floor, she questioned witnesses with precision, cutting through political theater with the kind of clarity that couldn't be ignored. For the communities she represented, she wasn't just a voice in Washington. She was their proof that lived struggle could stand tall in halls of power. Contrast became her defining strength. Musk could point to capital, companies, and empires. Crockett pointed to people, principles, and a record built in sweat, not stock options. Where he threatened critics with lawsuits, she welcomed confrontation, knowing that truth wasn't fragile. Where he leaned on privilege, she leaned on perseverance. And then there was her lawyer. The man Musk thought would be easy to dismiss as just another attorney was, in fact, something much more. Civil rights champion, his entire career, was a catalog of battles against systems that told ordinary people they had no chance. He had stood in real courtrooms where verdicts weren't decided by money, but by moral clarity. He had taken on city halls, police departments, corporations larger than Musk's ego, and he had walked away victorious. Narrator: this wasn't just a lawyer, this was justice personified. Together, Crockett and her counsel weren't just responding to Musk's threats, they were embodying the very spirit he underestimated: the union of lived struggle and legal firepower. Musk had armies of lawyers on retainer, ready to bury critics in paperwork. But what he didn't have was a lawyer who fought like a man who'd seen rights stripped away, refused to let it stand. Every case in that lawyer's past was a lesson in survival. Every courtroom win was a reminder that arrogance stumbles when confronted with truth spoken plainly. Musk believed intimidation would silence Crockett. Instead, it gave her a chance to show the nation exactly why she belonged, not in spite of her roots, but because of them. Her journey wasn't an anomaly. It was a mirror. It reflected millions of immigrants, workers, and families who had been told, "You don't belong here." And like them, Crockett had answered not with retreat, but with defiance. Her fight was theirs, her voice an echo of their struggles, courage a validation of their worth. Narrator: so when Musk tried to bury her in legal threats, they answered with history itself behind them. The debate stage was electric, the kind of atmosphere where every word carried the weight of a thunderclap. Musk, leaning forward in his chair, wore that familiar half-smirk, a blend of arrogance and disbelief that anyone would dare challenge him. His voice cut through the air with sharpness. "This isn't even a fair fight. Your lawyer is out of his league. You should be thanking me for even acknowledging him." A ripple ran through the room, half laughter, half discomfort. The arrogance was palpable. Musk positioning himself as a giant swatting at a fly was theater, meant to belittle, to remind everyone that he was not just rich, but untouchable. But Crockett's lawyer didn't flinch. He leaned in ever so slightly, his tone calm, his gaze steady, his words slicing like a scalpel. "Mr. Musk," he said with deliberate clarity, "the law does not bend to wealth." The room shifted. You could feel it. Smirk on Musk's face stiffened for a fraction of a second. The audience let out a collective murmur, and even the anchors glanced at each other with raised brows. Sensing the balance of power begin to tilt, narrator, it was no longer a debate about words. It was a collision between arrogance and accountability. Musk tried to laugh it off, doubling down with bravado. "Please, do you really think the courts care about speeches? Money talks? Influence decides outcomes? I've built rockets, satellites, cars that reshape industries. What have you built besides rhetoric?" But this time, his attack felt hollow. The lawyer's response wasn't defensive. It was measured, carrying the weight of lived experience and an unshakable belief in the principles he defended. "I've built victories for families crushed by corporations like yours. I've built justice where intimidation was supposed to. Silence people. And unlike your rockets, Mr. Musk, my work doesn't collapse when tested." The audience gasped, softly at first, then louder, as the sting of the words settled. Cameras zoomed in on Musk, and for the first time, the mogul's confidence flickered. He shifted in his seat, his fingers drumming against the armrest, a tell that even he couldn't disguise. Narrator, the tide was turning. The billionaire who'd weaponized his empire to silence critics was suddenly the one grasping for footing. The anchors tried to steer the conversation, but the moment had taken on a life of its own. Musk raised his voice, sharper now, frustration leaking through his practiced composure. "This is laughable. You think a soundbite makes you right? I can hire 100 lawyers like you by tomorrow morning." The lawyer didn't even raise his tone. Calmly, he looked Musk dead in the eye and replied, "And yet, tonight, you're facing just one. And it's enough." Silence. Heavy, breathtaking silence. The kind where even the cameras seemed to hesitate, lingering on Musk's face as he blinked, searching for words that no longer carried weight. The arrogance that had filled the room minutes earlier was evaporating, placed by unease. Audience members leaned in, some whispering, others shaking their heads in disbelief. On social media, live tweets began to explode. Hashtag Musk cornered and hashtag Loverwealth started flashing across screens. Narrator, the courtroom wasn't here, but justice had already entered the room. And then the lawyer delivered the line that sealed the moment. "Power can intimidate. Money can be distracting. But truth ends the charade." The stage froze. Musk opened his mouth, but nothing came. The crowd erupted, not in applause, but in the kind of audible gasp that marks the shift of history, the kind where the mighty are humbled and the underestimated rise. Narrator, and with one line, the balance shattered. But the real blow was still to come. The debate had ended, but the story was only beginning. Within minutes of the broadcast, social media lit up like wildfire. Screens across America buzzed with the same stunned reaction. Elon Musk, the billionaire who had spent years bending narratives to his will, had finally been cornered by something. He couldn't outspend truth. Hashtags began to surge almost instantly. Hashtag Musk shut down trended within the hour, soon joined by hashtag Justice Over Wealth. TikTok clips replayed the lawyer's devastating line, "If truth is defamation, then your empire is built on lies." With slow-motion edits, dramatic music overlays, and captions that made the moment larger than life. On X, people shared split-screen memes. Musk's frozen, pale expression on one side, Crockett's serene nod on the other. The caption, "Money talks. But dignity roars." Narrator, it wasn't just a debate anymore. It had become a cultural reckoning, a battle cry for those who had long felt silenced by power. Late-night comedians wasted no time. Monologues opened with punchlines about Musk's meltdown, the audience roaring with laughter as clips of his faltering defense played on repeat. One comedian joked, "Musk wanted to send people to Mars." but apparently couldn't survive 10 minutes in a courtroom debate on Earth. The crowd howled. The ridicule, amplified night after night, sealed the image of Musk as not untouchable, but vulnerable. Meanwhile, grassroots activists saw an opportunity. Organizations that had spent years fighting corporate intimidation took to social platforms, praising Crockett and her legal team. "This is why we resist," one activist posted. "Because truth, when spoken with courage, is louder than any billionaire's threats." Their words struck a chord. Donations to immigrant rights groups and justice coalitions surged in the days that followed. Celebrities added their voices. Musicians, actors, athletes all chimed in with their takes. Some posted screenshots of Musk's stunned face with one-word captions like "ouch" or "done." Others shared Crockett's nod as a symbol of resilience, adding messages about dignity, equality, and accountability. The cultural weight of the moment grew heavier with every share, every post, every retweet. Narrator: For once, the conversation wasn't about Musk's wealth or his rockets. It was about accountability. It was about justice. It was about who really holds the power, the billionaires in their boardrooms, or the people with truth on their side. But as the laughter echoed online and in living rooms across the country, something deeper began to surface. Commentators and scholars weighed in, warning that beneath the memes and the mockery lay a profound question about America's future. If Musk could so easily threaten lawsuits to silence critics, what did that mean for ordinary people without cameras, without platforms, without fearless lawyers to defend them? Editorials poured in. One op-ed read, "This isn't about Elon Musk alone. It's about the system that allows wealth to masquerade as truth until someone dares to challenge it." Another headline declared, "Justice went viral, but can it?" Last narrator, the laughter was real. The memes were cathartic. But buried within them was a sobering truth that this clash was not just entertainment, but a mirror held up to a nation grappling with power and justice. In barbershops, coffee houses, university classrooms, and family dinner tables, people talked about it. Parents showed their kids the clip, reminding them that standing up to arrogance matters. Students debated whether this moment marked a shift in the balance of cultural power. Workers, exhausted after long shifts, replayed the lawyer's line on their phones, feeling seen in ways politics rarely delivered. For Musk, the aftershocks were undeniable. Every attempt to reclaim the narrative was drowned out by the sheer volume of voices celebrating his undoing. His usual defenders were quieter, more hesitant, knowing the clip had reached too far, cut too deep to spin. Crockett, however, emerged. Stronger. She didn't need to post anything flashy. A single message from her account: dignity greater than wealth, justice greater than intimidation, went viral with millions of likes, shares, and reposts. It wasn't just a line. It was a manifesto for a movement. Narrator: It wasn't just Crockett's victory. It was validation for millions of people who had felt powerless. It was a reminder that arrogance collapses when confronted with truth spoken without fear. Yet, as the nation laughed, cheered, and celebrated, the story wasn't finished. Because the spectacle wasn't just about Musk's downfall. It was about the system he represented. Cliffhanger. But buried in the laughter, a deeper truth was about to emerge. The storm of laughter, hashtags, and late-night punchlines had turned Musk's threat into a cultural joke. But for Jasmine Crockett and her lawyer, this moment was never about comedy. It was about clarity. It was about drawing a line in the sand between two Americas, one ruled by unchecked power, another where truth, dignity, and service stood unshaken. Narrator: At its core, this was never a courtroom clash. It was a moral test, and the verdict reached far beyond that studio. Crockett reframed the entire ordeal in a way that resonated with millions. Standing before cameras the following day, she said with quiet conviction, "The true measure of strength isn't who shouts the loudest or who sues the fastest. It's who stands tallest in truth." That line struck a chord. It wasn't just a rebuke of Musk. It was a reminder of what America claims to be at its best: The story became a mirror for the nation. On one side stood arrogance, wielding wealth as a weapon. On the other stood resilience, carried forward by those who had fought their way into the halls of power, not through privilege, but through persistence. Crockett's own journey, from working-class Texas roots to the U.S. Congress, embodied that resilience. Her lawyer's calm, deliberate takedown in the debate crystallized it. Together, they had turned intimidation into inspiration. Commentators called it a teaching moment. Faith leaders spoke about humility. Civil rights activists invoked the long tradition of speaking truth to power. Teachers replayed the debate for their students, framing it as a living lesson in civics that the Constitution is not the property of the rich, but the inheritance of every American. Narrator, in that sense, Musk's threat was more than a blunder. It was a gift, a chance for millions to be reminded that power without empathy is hollow. But truth spoken with conviction reshapes history. The deeper lesson rippled outward, that leadership is not measured in dollars, but in dignity. That patriotism is not proven in lawsuits, but in sacrifice. And that freedom is not maintained by fear, but by those who dare to challenge it. Crockett's message cut through the noise because it was simple, timeless, and true. Authenticity beats arrogance, service beats ego, truth beats intimidation. In living rooms and online spaces, people began sharing their own stories. Immigrant parents spoke of working 2 jobs to give their children opportunities. Veterans spoke of serving a country that didn't always serve them back, but one they still believed in. Young activists spoke of fighting climate change, gun violence, and inequality. Movements too often brushed aside by elites with money to burn. Crockett's stand had given those voices a stage, even if only symbolically. Narrator. This was the lesson Elon Musk never saw coming, that a billionaire can dominate industries but cannot buy authenticity. He can shape markets, but not moral truth. And so, the moral crystallized into something larger than the clash itself. Crockett's side reminded America that justice isn't an abstract ideal. It's alive in every person who refuses to bow, every worker who demands fairness, every immigrant who holds their head high against insults. The lawyer's mic drop wasn't just a victory in a debate. It was a reminder that the fight for accountability, for dignity, for truth is never truly over. Narrator. This was only one battle in a much larger war, the ongoing fight for America's promise. A promise that has never been fully delivered, but one that moments like this bring just a little closer. The cameras may have stopped rolling, but the echoes of that night lingered. The deeper truth had emerged, sharper than ever, that the real strength of America does not come from its billionaires, but from its people. Cliffhanger. And this was only one chapter in the larger fight for America's promise. Elon Musk entered that debate with the swagger of a billionaire who thought money could silence the truth. He mocked, he threatened, and he tried to intimidate. But in the end, it wasn't his voice that carried the night. It was the steady, unshakable reply of Jasmine Crockett's lawyer. A reply that reminded America of something far bigger than one argument. That justice will always outlast arrogance. Narrator. What unfolded wasn't just a legal clash. It was a moral one. And the verdict was clear. Wealth may buy influence, but it cannot buy dignity. For millions watching, the message landed with force. This wasn't about Musk alone. It was about the countless moments when power has tried to bury truth and failed. Crockett and her team proved that intimidation doesn't define America. Accountability does. And when ordinary people stand tall, even billionaires are forced to bow. The lesson was simple, yet unforgettable. Truth beats arrogance, justice beats. Intimidation and dignity belongs not to the few, but to us all. And now, it's your turn. This movement for accountability and dignity doesn't end here. It begins with voices like yours. Subscribe to this channel for daily stories where truth takes on power. Share this video with friends who believe America's promise belongs to everyone, not just the wealthy. Join the conversation, because silence only helps the arrogant win. Narrator. Together, we don't just tell stories, we shape them. Together, we write the next chapter of America's promise.